Hey, hi, hello. Can you go ahead and go to the vocab section of your notebook? Add 7 rows now. Remember, you use the two-finger touch to insert rows above or below. Let's get started. So remember, green words you do not need to recopy, but let's go ahead and jump in with characterization. So characterization is a description of the distinctive nature or features of someone or something, and we're really going to focus in on someone. These are those same tools, things like physical movements, facial expressions, little descriptions that you used when you were creating your coaches last week in that warm-up. Go ahead and copy down the term and definition and come up with a related image or example for characterization now. All right, welcome back. The rest of these words really have to do with language itself. And in particular, let's look at Standard American English, or SAE. So Standard American English is a variety of English language generally used in professional communication in the US and taught in American schools. Oftentimes when we're talking about using like proper English, that kind of term, what folks mean when they say that is Standard American English. It's often used in writing more than it's used reliably in speaking. And in fact, I want to read you this quote from the American English Dialects and Variation Journal, that if we took a sample of everyday conversational speech, we would find that there are virtually no speakers who consistently speak formal standard English as prescribed in the grammar books. So while this may be a language that shows up a lot in writing, it rarely 100% consistently shows up in your speaking and maybe even in your reading. But people tend to attach a lot of value judgments around it, right? If people think like, oh, you can't speak proper, or people use the word broken English to indicate non-standard American English, it's very important to remember that literally no one does this all of the time. Go ahead and copy down the term and definition for SAE now. Come up with a related example or image. Welcome back. Let's talk about dialect and slang kind of at the same time here. So dialect is a particular form of language that is peculiar to a specific region or a social group. And I want to contrast that with slang. So slang are informal or non-standard variety of speech which consists of newly coined and rapidly changing words and phrases. Oftentimes these are nouns, they sometimes are verbs, but they're not entire language structures. And to do that, let's take a look here really fast at this dialect versus slang chart. So dialect is particular to a group of people. This may be an identity marker like African American Vernacular English. AAVE is a dialect, but it may also be particular to a type of geography, right? When we look at Creole speakers, for example, in Louisiana, that's particular to a certain area. Slang, on the other hand, is an informal, non-standard variety of speech, which consists of newly coined and rapidly changing words and phrases. It's distinguished by its vocabulary, versus dialect is distinguished by vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation. There's a real structure to it. Dialect can be standard or non-standard. Slang is always non-standard and informal. And dialect usually indicates that the speaker belongs to a particular geographical location or group of people, but slang can reflect an individual's membership in a certain social group. So let's take a moment here, and I want you to copy down, again, those definitions for dialect and slang. Come up with a related image or example sentence as well. So sometimes it's hard to understand the difference between dialect and slang, and you can often tell when you hear people use these dialect or slang incorrectly. When someone uses dialect incorrectly, it often means that they are not actually a part of that group. Oftentimes that may be true with slang, but that may also fall under this concept of appropriation, which I'm going to talk to you about in a minute. Let's jump into assimilate first. So assimilate is to take on the qualities of the dominant culture and erase the qualities of the non-dominant culture. And to talk to you about assimilate, I actually want to talk to you a little bit about my family history. So I want to show you this trunk. And this trunk belonged to my great-grandmother, my grandmother's mother, who moved to the US from Sweden when she was 26. She had my grandmother with her. My grandma was like very young. And her family, she moved with, this was the only thing that she brought with her. Entire possessions fit into this trunk. And she spoke only Swedish, right? But she wanted her daughter, my grandmother, to be kind of quote unquote successful in this new place that they were moving to, that they were immigrating to. So she made an English only rule in their household. And the rule was, even though no one in that family could speak English, at home they were only going to speak English. And they kind of stumbled through this. And as a result, my grandmother, who like was raised originally speaking Swedish, lost all of that Swedish because her mother made this choice to assimilate, to take on the characteristics of the dominant group. Now, as a result, my dad doesn't know any Swedish. I don't know any Swedish. This is really largely gone from our history because of this conscious choice to assimilate. Go ahead and take on the definition and the term assimilate and come up with a related image or example sentence now. All right, and then let's hold assimilate in your brain, but then also let's take on this new term appropriate, which is almost kind of, in some ways, the mirror of that. Appropriate is the adoption of elements of the minority culture by elements of the dominant culture. So I was talking about this in the context of dialect and slang before. When you see someone from majority culture, let's say like an older person, not unlike myself, trying to take on elements of the minority culture, let's say younger folks, teenager language, if I try and speak in a teen dialect, if there really is one, I try and use teen slang, it sounds weird, it sounds wrong, and that's because I might be appropriating it. Now, there's a difference between appropriation and appreciation, which is not on here. You might be able to appreciate the elements of a minority culture. Maybe you have a musician or an artist or a storyteller or whatever that you really like. But to appropriate means to be able to kind of treat like it's disposable, to pick it up and then put it back down however you want without really embracing the full complexity and richness of a culture. We are coming up on a holiday that often, not always by any means, but often has some issues with appropriation, and that holiday is Halloween. So think about it as you go about seeing other folks' costumes, as you go about hearing other, planning what you're going to do, a way to consider appropriation. But within the context of this class, I really want you to consider it in terms of language this week. Go ahead and copy down appropriation and then the definition, come up with a related example or image. Oh, this video is a long one. One more, I promise. Last one is voice print. And voice print is the distinctive manner of speaking or a person or a character. It's like a fingerprint, but it's speech. We're going to take way more notes about this, and you're really going to do most of your focused work this week on voice print. So that's all I'm going to say right now. Go ahead and copy it down. I'll see you in class.